Hi, James. I have a question. Why don't Christian women have to wear hijab?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first and foremost, the reason Christian women don't have to wear hijab is because the Bible doesn't tell Christian women to wear hijab. Doesn't mean that Christian women can't wear a hijab. I know plenty of Christian women who live in Muslim countries who wear a hijab, and that's fine. It's just not a mandate. Which brings us to three sub-questions that relate to that. The first is, does the Bible care about clothing? Does the Bible care about modesty? And does the Bible care about preventing lust? So on the clothing front, it's actually God himself who invented clothing. When Adam and Eve had sinned, it says that they realized they were naked and they were ashamed. So in order to cover up people's shame, God created clothing out of animal skins and clothed Adam and Eve. 1 Corinthians 12 talks about that we have unpresentable parts of our bodies which we hold in most honor by covering them up, and that it's not necessary to cover every part of our body up like we cover up those parts. And then the Bible absolutely cares about modesty, but in a way that's very different from the sort of Quranic justification for this. So as a caveat, I know that lots of different Muslim women choose to wear the hijab for lots of different reasons. But when the Quran talks about it, it says, "And tell the believing women to lower their gaze and guard their chastity, and not to reveal their adornments except what normally appears. Let them draw their veils over their chests and not reveal their adornments except to their husbands, their fathers-in-law, their sons, their stepsons, their brothers' sons or sisters' sons, their fellow women, those bondwomen in their possession, male attendants with no desire, or children who are still unaware of women's nakedness. Let them not stomp their feet, drawing attention to their hidden adornments. Turn to Allah in repentance altogether, O believers, so that you may be successful." And then in another surah, it says, "O Prophet, ask your wives, daughters, and believing women to draw their cloaks over their bodies. In this way, it is more likely they will be recognized as virtuous and not be harassed, and Allah is all-forgiving, most merciful." So you can see that the logic here is explicitly about protecting women from the unwanted gazes and sexual advances of men who they are not married to. Whereas in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul talks about modesty like this: "Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works." So you can see here the reasoning Paul uses is not about protect from the unwanted gazes and advances of men, but is actually really dealing with people's social status and using clothing to try and flaunt that over other people. Because, if we're honest, most of the time, if a woman's trying to impress anyone with the way she dresses, it's not men, it's other women. So the problem here is not somebody trying to entice men sexually, it's people trying to show their social status by the way they dress. And that's not to say that you couldn't apply that to a woman who is trying to sort of entice men by the way she dresses, because the logic's still the same. Don't let your beauty and adorning be like this external thing. Let it be your relationship with God and your inner character. That's your good works is your true clothing and your true honor, and that applies to everyone. But it's not really being used as a cover up so men don't look at you. That's not to say the Bible doesn't care about that, because Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5 that you've heard it said don't commit adultery, but I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent is guilty of adultery in his heart. So Jesus expects his men to treat women honorably no matter how they're dressed, and puts that as a man's responsibility to control himself. So that brings us to two follow-up questions here. One, I often get asked, in 1 Corinthians 11, there is a verse about Christian women covering their heads while in churches, and people say, well, see, Christian women are told to cover their heads, that means they have to wear like hijab. The problem with that is 1 Corinthians 11 seems to be talking about an eternal principle of God making men distinctive from women and displaying that and displaying your proper order of things in the way you meet. And in the Corinthian cultural context, that meant wearing a head covering while a woman was praying. And it says that a woman is naturally given her hair as a covering itself, according to nature. However, let's say I'm wrong about that. Let's say that is actually supposed to be a universal practice and I'm missing the point there. It's still about a woman covering her head while she's praying in church. That's not for all of life all the time. That would be like me walking into a mosque, seeing that no one is wearing shoes, and walking away believing that Muslims aren't allowed to wear shoes at any point in their life. It's not the case. And then the other one is people often say, look, you look at nuns, you look at pictures of the Virgin Mary, always wearing hijab, always covered up. Why don't other Christian women do this? And the fact is that what's happening there is, yes, you can find lots of pictures of Mary wearing a head covering, but that's because pictures of Mary represent the cultures that they are painted in. So if you find a picture of Mary from sort of Constantinople in 600 AD, she's wearing a head covering. If you find a picture of Mary from ancient Rome, she may have her hair done in the sort of ancient Roman braid style, depending on the culture she's represented in. And Christianity is not supposed to steamroll over different cultures. It's supposed to represent every culture that it's in. So, to close, it's not that the Bible doesn't care about modesty. Like a woman should think about that. But it's not the job of an external group of religious leaders or politicians to make that decision for you. That's something you have to consider from your heart between you and God, according to your own conscience. Thanks for watching. If you have more questions, why not check out the other videos in this series? If we haven't answered your question yet, you can submit it to almeida.org/ask. We aim to answer one question every week. Like and subscribe for more content.